Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Falk.
Mike Rapici, we meet again on Critical Media Studies. How are you?
Barry Falk. I'm very well this evening, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I was about to say, as always. That's not true.
But I love it.
Not
I love
doing well, but I am happy to be. What I really meant, I think, is I'm very happy to be with you here tonight to talk about Evgeny Morozov, in particular, an essay, one of many that he's been doing lately for the Boston Review on tech topics, on media studies related topics. And we're going to talk about this essay tonight, entitled, I will read the title now, Can AI Break Out of Panglossian Neoliberalism? Can I give the English professor's gloss on Pangloss?
If you don't, I have to, so go for it.
Are you
No, if don't, by all means, go.
Pangloss is a character in Voltaire's Candide, who is, even in the most horrible circumstances in the novel or novella, he's always insisting that it is the best of all possible worlds and that optimism will out.
Everything is for the very best.
Everything is for the best. Everything is going to work out for the best. So Panglossian neoliberalism would be I'll give a further gloss. Neoliberalism in this case stands for a kind of
faith in the free market.
A naive faith in the free market, and a belief that the free market, whatever it does, it's going to be good. It'll be good. It's all good.
So the title, what Morozov is saying, right, is that AI and the development of AI, the nascent development of AI, is stuck in this idea that it is good, that it is necessary, and that our best path forward is to leave the development of these various AI technologies
to the companies who know best,
to the market.
Yeah, to the market. Well, what that means is to the corporations who have already made investments in this and have experts working on it and who are ready to sell it to you.
Exactly. So this, for all of our friends of capitalism, this one's for you.
This is another episode that will irritate folk, but we specialize in that. Well, don't blame us. We're just the messenger of Evgeny Morozov, who is a very discerning. Goodness, is he Ukrainian?
Belarus.
You know what? I was just testing you, Michael.
Yes, thanks. I appreciate it. And I Googled as quickly as my fingers could Google. Very smart fellow, though.
Very smart fellow.
Friend of the show.
A friend of the show. A friend of the show, and that we've already talked about, Mr. Morozov's work in relation to another friend of the show, Yanis Varoufakis. And I think Morozov has this sort of, I don't know, really a kind of smart, paranational, cosmopolitan, in a good sense, very broad view of how technology works around the world, and understands the ways in which it articulates differently in different economic systems. And so, I mean, I think you're getting a kind of literally a global view of technology, somebody who's informed about the global situation of technology in Morozov's work. And so the Boston Review loves them and we like them too, I guess, is basically what I'm saying.
So shall we?
We shall. Do you want me to kick it off, or do you want to kick it off with
go ahead.
Opening thing? Well, we're going to talk about this essay and the question of generative AI. And we're going to take a tour through this article and give you some of the takeaways, and also maybe present some, I won't say problems with the article, but maybe we'll use some of Morozov's points as a platform to discuss some larger issues that are kind of typical critical media studies points,
Yeah,
or
I think he's got
right?
his argument is very reasonable, and
Mhm. Mhm.
unlike
We like
uh
that in critical media studies. We
well,
like
I guess
reasonable, right?
the thing that makes this interesting and is that if you think about like Jonathan Crary's Scorched Earth, right? Like, look,
Mhm.
the ship is sunk. You're just not aware of it yet. The only way to do this is to burn it all down. I don't think that Morozov is asking for radical changes. I think that well, I guess depending on your position, it could be radical, but it's a very reasoned approach
Mhm.
that I think is kind of the right kind of article to talk about, because the question that comes to mind time and again, he outlines,
Mhm.
what was it? He outlined seven
Why,
major
why don't you
issues
why don't
with,
you just go ahead and take it from there, Michael, since
yeah.
you're
So he outlined seven major issues, which I'll, outline in a second, about the way that artificial intelligence is being developed. And I think the thing that kept popping into my mind as I was reading this and as I went through it again was like, okay, this is fine. This is reasonable. What does the other side of this coin look like? Because I think there are two sides of this coin.
Mhm.
And so the title, I think, states a lot of his argument. The crux of his argument is like, look, these problems exist as a result of the fact that we are blindly and naively entrusting the development of these technologies
In
to
particular in this
corporations.
article. Well, but let's gloss some things for the audience. In particular, you're talking about problems, the problems of technology. He's very specific in this article. It's problems of what kind of technology, of generative AI
Generative AI, right?
development. And then go ahead. Go ahead. I just wanted to make sure that we gloss this as we go on.
Right. So his argument is like, look, there are problems with this, and it's probably not in our best interest to just, the Panglossian neoliberalism, right? To say, well, this is the best it's going to be. This is great. It's going to get better. We just have to blindly trust the market. The argument that I guess the response to that I kept coming around to is like, okay,
Mhm.
well, what would this look like if we did it differently?
Mhm.
Right.
And he
And
tries to answer that question.
he does. And that's why I'm saying I think it's an interesting discussion. And what's, I don't know, useful about this is he says, and I'll read this right now.
Okay, let's do it.
He says there are at least seven major issues with the current corporate driven development, production, and rollout of generative AI:
Mhm.
colon, inefficiency and waste, subpar quality of services, inadequate compensation for those who help train the models, exclusion of non-corporate players from R&D, lack of transparency about true costs, increased technological dependency of the global South on the global North, and most significantly, the conservative bias inherent in these systems, which favors stability and predictability over novelty and variety. Consider them in turn. What I like about that is that he offers these seven discrete points of engagement
Mhm. Mhm.
that you can take individually or you can take collectively. This is a wonderful piece to just talk about.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, I don't know. We could spend time on all seven, or we
I
can,
would say we don't do that, but
right.
I picked two here, and you're going to help me here. But
Hmm.
I'm gonna start to gloss when you were reading them. I picked out two, and I was going to try to give a partial answer, and you're going to help me fill it out, and then we'll try and sketch out, try to give a general picture, try to give the listener reader um, a general idea of um, of the arguments that of the wealth of arguments that he presents on each of these points. But
Hmm.
but I think we can quickly combine and make and clarify things by I'll pick two of these comments. Inadequate compensation. So let me go ahead and reread the very beginning of that sentence, and then I'll try to fill in some content for for two of the bullet points for two of the
Okay.
items.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's, I mean,
So
I don't find all seven of them equally engaging just because,
sure.
this is where do you put where do your interests lie? But I think a couple of these are really fascinating. So we'll
Okay,
see where we
so
go.
yeah, and maybe I'm picking two that are not your two, in which case I want to hear your two or three.
We'll see.
Okay.
Or yeah, let's see.
Or
Okay.
or
So
six. Okay, so
one,
there are at least seven major issues with the current corporate-driven development and production and rollout of generative AI inefficiency, generative
right.
AI.
So one was inefficiency and waste.
Right.
Two was subpar quality of services.
And I want to talk about number three, inadequate compensation for those who helped train the models.
Okay, so
And,
let's
and ex
let's let's just
yeah,
go there. Go ahead.
okay. Well, first off, I want to go back and just draw attention to what's a kind of general, make a general comment about the problem that he sees with Panglossian neoliberalism. Partly what he thinks is the problem is that I mean, we're now rapidly trying to develop AI technologies. And there's a lot of questions and controversies and contention and a lot of different arguments in technological in technology industries and in the larger community about AI. But one thing that he notes that we don't question is whether or not experts, big corporate experts, corporations should have a hand in the development process. We don't
Mm-hmm.
question that. The status quo is that corporations are going to determine the technology that they develop, and they're going to sell that technology to us, and we're going to go along with it. So this alternative, Morozov questions because he thinks it's, well, first off, I think he's a statist in the sense that he thinks, it's not, why can't there be, he wonders why there can't be a public option. Why couldn't you have something like, he uses the example of the International Monetary Fund
Or
uh,
Wikipedia as well.
or Wikipedia. Why couldn't you have a structure that develops in the public interest and have that oversee the development of these technologies rather than a market-driven, profit-driven corporate enterprise? So
Mm-hmm.
the status quo is that, and this is what he's kind of questioning. And he draws attention to these seven major issues to make us question whether or not it is indeed the case that developing that corporate driven development of generative AI is indeed the thing that we should just like, let's lay back and let the corporations take over, whether we should just placidly accept it. And against that idea of placidly accepting it, he says, okay, here are some problems I see. I'll talk about two here. Inadequate compensation for those who help train the models. Very quickly, very briefly. One of the things he notes is that driven, corporate driven technological developers, they don't like paying money to content creators,
That's right.
right? So number one, that if you want adequate compensation for people who are training the models, who are really doing the R&D. So, and actually, so inadequate compensation for those who help train the models, exclusion of non-corporate players from research and development. Those two go hand in hand. That really what is happening, what will happen in a corporate-driven development is that those people who are doing R&D, unless they're part of the corporate player, their work is going to get appropriated and oftentimes these content creators are going to get erased from the picture.
Right. Or either erased or just blatantly stolen from. I mean, there's
Yeah.
two
Oh,
different
oh
pictures.
yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
so I think there's another interesting problem
Mhm.
in this. in terms of the compensation. And like the thing about this is we can handle these individually. There is a bleed over from one to the
Yeah,
next. The
yeah,
thing
yeah, right.
that's interesting is he notes subpar quality of services.
Go
And
for it.
on the surface, it doesn't make sense. But in another piece that he wrote for the New York Times last year, and we can link to both of these in the description, he makes the argument
Can I just
that
say how impressed I am that you did that? I saw what you did.
you
That's
like what I
very
did there.
impressive. I
That's good.
like it. Go ahead.
He makes the argument that part of the problem with having these as part of private interest, as opposed to being overseen by an independent group, right,
Hmm.
is that, and this goes in line with paying your um, the people who train the models, is that it's an arms race. Rather than
Absolutely.
everybody working
Absolutely.
together, you're creating an arms race. So they're rushing through this development.
Absolutely, man.
Quality checks are poor because it's not about getting it right or getting it useful. It's the first person to get it to market.
Right.
And
And then didn't Jonathan Crary make a similar point about the death of scientific research in the scorched earth economy? Is that I think he was the one who made this point about the fact that at a certain point, corporations don't want, they say we're all about R&D. But at a certain point, they're not about
well,
R&D.
you
It's not
no,
about
no,
develop. It's
no,
about development and production.
it
It's
is
not
because
about
what happens,
R&D, right?
is we can release an imperfect version and let you, the user, who is
Figure it out.
living in the perfect, the best, because you have a new shiny toy,
You are in the best
you
possible world.
fix it for us. So
Yeah,
it's, I think that these are problems that are acceptable and or built in by design, right?
absolutely.
I don't
Absolutely.
want to pay you to do this because the reality is I'm charging you to use this. And
Um,
so that
yeah.
question becomes almost, the question of compensation becomes almost circular. Look, I need you to pay a subscription to unlock the fancy features here. It's really buggy, and your use is actually going to be the thing that fixes us. So I need you to pay me to really be a de facto employee, right? Like we become the product, and it's an interesting sort of problem that Morozov argues in a couple different places. Um, we're all too willing, like this
Right.
is
Right.
Panglossian neoliberalism. This
Right.
is the best thing. We've been sold that this is the best thing.
Right. Right.
So take your
Say it
is it
with me, neoliberalism. That's what
right?
you're describing. That we're working as we're the worker, we're the consumer. The consumer is the worker, another worker in the R&D
So
chain.
here's
Mhm.
here's something I kind of want your thoughts on.
Yeah.
The one that he follows with inadequate compensation for those who help train the models, he
Mhm.
follows that by saying that another problem is the exclusion of non-corporate players from R&D, right? To me, this is really a quote unquote problem that ties everything we've talked about together,
Mhm.
right? This is an arms race. If I involve other people, I lose control. Two, nobody, it's like we're trying to develop these technologies almost for the sake of development. They're not really answering specific problems. You know, it's
Absolutely.
it's it's what can we do? Not what can we do to solve a problem. It's just what's capable. We'll figure it out later, but it's the best. Don't worry. It's the best. And I think that part of the reason we have non-corporate players excluded from the R&D, one, we'd have to pay them.
Number one.
Two, we'd lose control and we'd lose our place in the arms race.
Number two.
What is this? Is this a problem with AI, or is this just the cost of neoliberalism?
Oh, I think Morozov feels at a certain point, I think you're drawing attention to, and I don't know if Morozov comes out and says this, but I think it's implied that at a certain point, the logic of corporate driven development, it doesn't matter what technology. I mean, now everybody is worried about and concerned with and jazzed about generative AI. But I think everything that he is listing here as a problem in the corporate-driven development and manufacture of generative AI would be true of any technology. So I think it's implied, at least, that the problem is Panglossian neoliberalism. It's not specific to the new technologies of AI.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think that's Morozov's answer. That's my best take on that.
Okay.
I wanted to, before we go further, in fact, I was just going to mention very briefly the next thing in the item list. But then I think we kind of gave a picture of, his problems with it. But I just wanted to underscore something really, really smart that you said earlier when you were talking about you used the term arms race
Mm-hmm.
and the ways in which this ends up being a sort of competitive arms race. And because it's an arms race, as you were just mentioned just a minute ago, um, you have to limit information. You have to limit the flow of information. You have to limit the circulation of information and all these type of things, and limit who gets to make choices and gets to make decisions. That also would be, I'm returning over and over to this phrase, the current corporate driven development of technologies. That comes part and parcel from that. That's part and parcel. This idea that the R&D has to be exclusionary, competitive, cutthroat, a quote unquote arms race in your term.
Right. Right. So the argument is basically, look, if we make this a public good, if we make this
Yes,
something,
we can
if
subvent
we
it,
if
right?
we de
Circumvent this.
the argument is almost as if like if we remove the profit incentive from this, then what, like, I'm
Oh, I think that's
curious.
exactly the argument. I think that's exactly his argument, in fact, what you just said. What if you take it out of the hand of the corporate drivers,
Mhm.
you're taking it out, you're getting this discussion, you're putting this discussion in the hands of people who can talk about it without necessarily consulting the profit motive and profits for and talking and considering profits for shareholders at every turn. That
Mhm.
is, I think, exactly his point.
Okay. Shall we move on to the next?
I just wanted, well, I just wanted to move on to one point and just talk about it briefly, and then maybe we can move on to talk about his solution. But I just wanted to say, I just wanted to give a quick gloss on another of his items in terms of major issues that he sees with the production and rollout of generative AI. He mentions the increased, quote, the increased technological dependency of the global south on the global north. This very simply is explained that most of the corporate drivers happen to be in America,
Mhm.
and that if one opened it up, moved away from corporate driving, and basically China is the big exception to, you have this bipolar world, but basically the global south isn't represented, Asia isn't represented,
Mhm.
that most of the representatives of this corporate development are in the global north. So necessarily taking it away from corporate drivers would open up, would make it less exclusionary and decrease the dependency of the global south and the global north. So just a simple point there.
Right. And I think, well, we might as well just follow this through because his last point to me really is the most interesting in
Well,
all
let's
of
do it.
this.
Let's do it.
And it follows that, and I think it is set up by everything. And most significantly, the conservative bias inherent in these systems, which favor stability and predictability over novelty and variety. This was the most interesting thing I think that Morozov brought to the table here. And it's not to say the other stuff wasn't. I just really was taken with this idea that the problem, and this is rooted in the dominance of, I guess, Silicon Valley developing these. And then on the flip side of that coin, China being the other major player in this AI arms race, is that you're really focusing on two things, right? One, you're focusing on very limited perspectives that do not consider everything else in the world. you're training these models according to these perspectives.
Mhm.
And the fascinating thing that really got me thinking about this is that, we have this massive, and have had for quite some time now, this massive reliance on big data, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
this belief in big data as being able to reveal trends and
Mhm.
predictive models, right? And you see this everywhere. I mean, you see this in financing, you see this in urban planning, right? This is the thing that drives everything, right? The predictive models based on a sample size that is not globally representative for sure, but is certainly oftentimes not even locally representative in the North. But it also, and this is his thing, favors stability and predictability over novelty and variety,
Right.
right? You are only able to use these models to predict what will happen because of the past. And that sounds like a stupid gripe to have, right? Like, yes, we've been told forever that if we don't learn from history, we can't move forward. But it's not so much, I guess the thing that he brought out to me that I thought was really fascinating, and I kind of want your take on this. Maybe I'm making a lot of nothing here, but this idea that these models look to the past to deal with the present and only really talk about the present and the near future, or maybe the distant future, but only in terms of the past. That
Oh,
the idea
absolutely.
of
Absolutely.
novelty or ingenuity, of creativity,
Absolutely.
is non-existent in all of this. And
And
you,
also individual, along with creativity, individuality, individual solutions to problems, or
yes,
individually developed, cultivated solutions to problems. Well, Michael, that's a my answer to that. Let me go. I'll try and point to another place in Morozov at the end of the article and attempt to sort of quote unquote answer your query. He does give an example of what AI might look like if we
mm-hmm,
take it away from the corporate producers. And he gives this example of, and I'll read it briefly. And then after I read this brief segment, I'm eager to hear your comment. He gives an example that, and in fact, he of course, like every smart person in the world, he has his podcasts and he discusses this example in his podcast, A Sense of Rebellion, which we can sort of point our listeners to if they want to hear more about this particular example, but I'll talk about it briefly and use his words. Central to their vision was a technology called self-organizing controllers. This is the type of thing you can have if you don't have the big boys, the big corporate boys taking over. Self-organizing controllers developed by the now largely forgotten company Adaptronics, an early pioneer in neural networks. These controllers were initially designed for military jets. One of the things that, parenthetically, one of the things that Morozov points, over and over again, or I mean, probably our listeners know this all too well, but this would be a good place to repeat it, that most of what we talk about technological design in terms of technological innovations were basically army projects, military projects before they entered the corporate sphere, right?
right.
So and this was another of those. So even self-organizing controllers, what Morozov likes, these were initially designed for military projects as part of a military project, initially designed for military jets, but the Boston Labs members thought they could repurpose them, not just for civilian, but for outright subversive applications. Ooh. Okay, so here's his example. Imagine a smart chair of the kind they were working on at the lab, one that allows you to tweak the shape of the cushions using a controller. The chair's smartness, quote unquote, its intelligence, doesn't derive from what you were talking about before. Analyzing data, not a stochastic parrot, not finding data, not looking for the mean, not looking for the average, right? Not looking at all of history, big data in order to find the mean. but predicting, but it is trying. It's not. Let me read here. I got lost. Doesn't derive from analyze. The results do not derive from analyzing data related to all the other chairs in the universe to predict an ideal position already predetermined, as a ChatGPT powered smart chair might do. Nor does it arise from closely surveilling a user before and after their first use of the chair. Not so much in this article, but in most of the, and I think also in the New York Times article that you referenced, but certainly in other things that Morozov mentions, is that a lot of times neoliberal technologies are first and foremost thought of in terms of what their surveillance capacities and their power for surveillance. Okay, it's not about surveillance. It's not about predicting an ideal position as a ChatGPT powered smart chair might do. Instead, the intelligence, I'm quoting again, the intelligence of the lab's chair instead lies in its self-organizing controller, which interacts with the person sitting in it. And I won't read the rest of it, but the focus is on interaction. And interaction is Morozov's way of restoring the kind of creativity, Michael, you were talking about, and adding, and hopefully bringing creativity, innovation back into the AI generated stuff equation.
So the question, right, that I come to with this, and he talks about, I'm trying to think how to say this. The problem I have is that it seems to me that these technologies can either show us things, right? Which is, I think, the current state, right? Like you can ask ChatGPT to do something.
Show me how to do this.
Right. And it will create something for you.
Yeah.
Really based on its understanding of the language you use in context, and then going to see what has been done. And then it will scrape however many billion sources of data that it's got, and it will produce something that it believes looks like an intelligible answer. The thing that the chair brings up is interesting, because what we're talking about now is an interactive engagement with AI. And that is, to my knowledge, largely missing across these. And it seems to me, it makes sense to me that these are missing, that this model of artificial intelligence or artificial generative intelligence, well, is the case because it's not easily controlled, right? I can create a product that will answer your questions, and I can create a product that will answer questions specifically related to finance or education or literature, whatever the case may be. But if I create something that says, look, this will make you a better cushion, right? The problem with that is, I don't know, can you sell, why don't we have this? Why aren't we doing this? And I can sell you that cushion. We can get the perfect cushion for you. What is the reason that it's not done like this? Because if you think about it, right? On one hand, it's much slower and much more intensive to deal with people individually when you can just let something like ChatGPT loose and say, go create answers for things. But the problem with that is it's not actually moving us forward. It might be taking us somewhere new, and we might believe in our Panglossian way that this is a better place. But it's an issue of, I think, integration. And to me, the current and future seeming iterations of AI are all along this track. Why don't we have, like, can you think of a reason why nobody's jumping on this idea to
I think,
make,
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
why don't we have profoundly personalized cushions in our chairs?
I think, well, I feel you're answering your question. Or I think you are saying things that to me are the answer to your question. You were saying that people are getting uh, answers that are usually that are efficient, that do the job. And I think the answer to your question is these efficient answers, as opposed to the creative answers, they're pleasing the producer
See,
and they're pleasing the customer. The
see,
customer is satisfied with it, I think.
I think one of the sort of the pillars of Morozov's argument is that we have been conditioned
Yeah, right.
to
Right.
understand that AI has to fit in this particular context.
Mhm. And
And that,
we're buying it.
right. And chief among those assumptions is efficiency, right?
Indeed. Indeed.
Waste is bad, efficiency
Mhm.
is good, speed, again, it's the arms race. And maybe these technologies can help you in your own individual arms races, and that's it. So we're pushing efficiency. And I think part of Morozov's argument is that maybe we're asking the wrong questions of these technologies. Maybe we're approaching them the wrong way. We were talking before we started recording here about, well, like, all right, well, what's the sort of point of engagement with this? Where do we go with this? And one of the questions that I came up with was, well, how do you, what would it take to realize what Morozov is asking for or is suggesting would be a better way of doing things? Because one way of looking at his position would be to say, hey, maybe we should just slow down and think about the assumptions we're making and the questions that we're chasing. And maybe that's not the right way of doing things. Maybe
Good. That's a
this
good point.
entire area needs to be recontextualized. And the problem, right, is that this exists in a neoliberalist paradigm. I hate that phrasing, but that this is a for-profit game. And so the question, I guess, the answer to the question to me seems to say, well, the only way to flip this is to create value on the other side, right? Like if I can properly incentivize people to make a more individualized, more idiosyncratic version of these things that is interactive as opposed to reactive, then perhaps we could slow these down. Does that get done? Is that a kind of thing we can do?
Um, well, I will,
Because I think
wow.
yes.
Huh? Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I think
I don't
yes.
want to ruin your flow here. Go
I
for
don't
it.
know. I got a flow at all. It's funny. I'm like oddly bothered by this because here's the reason why I'm bothered by this. Because I think that the places we see these technologies or versions of these
Mhm.
technologies, shadows
Mhm.
of these technologies,
Mhm.
are in obviously sort of bespoke, super high end luxury goods. And
Mhm.
that's part of the problem is that the profit incentive
It's too much, right?
caters to a
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
small minority that can afford them.
Yeah.
And then the potential of these technologies is completely squandered on a comfortable seat, which
Right,
is
right,
important, but
right, right. Well, like I said, I don't want to ruin your flow. I think you're developing a thought here. My comment is going to take us in a slightly different direction. So we're ready for that? Okay.
take us
Uh,
away, sir.
I'm going to say I'm going to give my sideways answer to your question about, well, what can be done about this and how could we use Morozov's conclusion about the importance of interaction um, as a starting point for a healthier or more productive, more creative use of AI generative AI. Um, I'm going to answer the question slightly by avoiding the question. I would think that the only thing that I think you and me, and by you and me, I'm talking about really I'm talking about everyone on the consuming edge, everyone on the user edge of this. I I'm I don't think our, even collectively, I don't think we, I don't think our collective creativity is enough to move the needle. I think the only thing that could stop the onrush, that could stop the juggernaut of Panglossian neoliberalism is, um, if you're if you're a Milton Friedman capitalist, you might want to stop listening here and just go ahead and rewind and listen to the rest of the podcast and end here. But I think state action or legal action through the auspices of the state governments, or even better, international governments. I think it's the only thing that can stop um, corporate-driven technologies. I think it's it. In other words, you could just put checks on the process. The best, I think, pragmatically, and I'm thinking like Morozov in kind of pragmatic way, is I think your creativity and our creative consumption is not going to be enough to move the needle. To hell
Here's
with the smart chair. I think the only thing that could really put that could stop, or not, it's not going to stop it either,
mm-mm.
but it could halt it. And I think that's the best you could do right now, is you could sort of halt it, make it more difficult for the corporate driven technologies to impose their logics on the mode of production. So that would be one thing. So that would be one thing. Go ahead and make your comment, and I have a final comment
Well,
as
I
well.
just want to play devil's advocate to that
Sure,
solution for a second.
sure.
The question I have is
Hmm.
that these technologies to me feel almost like prototypes of shiny new toys, right? We're developing them.
Hmm.
And as we had said earlier, and Morozov has argued, I think we're not developing them for a specific purpose. These aren't
Hmm.
necessarily because everybody's developing their own thing, right? And so it's this race to see who can get it done.
Hmm.
And I feel like at the core of this is an idea, right? The idea is, hey, let's get machines to take various inputs,
Hmm.
interpret them, and offer answers or offer responses,
Hmm.
right? And if we legislate and we say, well, we have to do them this way or we have to do them that way, or it's
Hmm.
illegal to do it this, or you have to do it that way. I think that because they seem to me so scattershot
Hmm.
and
Well, who's they?
the
What's they?
technologies,
The
the
technology
artificial
or the developers,
well,
both.
both. The
Both.
developers are the people making these, right? Because you see this everywhere. Everybody's got some version of this. We've got
Mhm.
chatbots that will give
Mhm.
you that will run you in circles and put you in the right
Mhm.
place, right? We've got um you got chat GPT, which will teach you how to do all sorts of horrible things if you figure out a way to do it right. Like they're all over the place.
Mhm.
I feel like if you try and restrict them or legislate them,
Mhm.
it's whack-a-mole. It's just going to pop up somewhere else because because we're not chasing a defined public good,
I agree.
because
Yeah.
we're chasing profit. When you legislate something and say it has to be done this way, it has to be done that way, I think one of two things are going to happen. You're either going to create an endless game of whack-a-mole, which is just expensive and not terribly productive, or alternately, you're going to grind the wheels to a halt, in which case one of two things happens, right? Either people
I
abandon it.
want to grind, but let me interrupt you to
Mhm.
say, I want to grind the wheels to a halt. That's my thing. That's my solution.
Okay,
It's not
so
a totalizing solution. It's a pragmatic solution. I want them to slow the F down.
well, see, but there's a difference between slowing down and grinding it to a halt. To me, if you grind this to a halt
Hmm.
through legislative action,
Hmm.
then I'm guessing, so I'm putting words in your mouth here. I'm
Hmm.
guessing the hope is that some very good, very smart, philanthropic people
Hmm.
come along and say, okay, let's pick this up and let's try and develop this in this new heavily heavily, what's the word I'm looking for, restricted
Well,
space.
well,
And now
Is it
It,
restrictive, or is it just a game that is going to play by different rules, which is what we want in the first place? We want a game with different rules. That's what you mean by restrictive. And that I like that. And I want that. And I think you want that.
well, maybe my concern here, right? As I said, the thing that flipped the lights on for me is Morozov's argument that, hey, these things favor stability and
Sure,
predictability over novelty and variety. And
sure.
to get novelty and variety, you have to cater to marginalized voices. You have to
Yeah,
engage with quiet voices. You have to do all of the things that big data does not do naturally,
I
right?
agree. I agree.
And if we are going to say, this is an interesting idea, I just don't know that I buy it yet, but I'm confident you can bring me around, right? If we're going to say, look, we have to, in a way, shift the incentive here away from profit and into some sort of more humanitarian interest,
He talks about the humanities and humanism in
right?
it.
So
Yeah.
you have to bring this back. We have a problem here because if you say, well, look, let's hand it over to the universities, right? Well, the universities are all wrapped up in STEM and we got
Right
to
now
get
they're R&D. They're R&D. Yeah, exactly. Right.
right. So that's not the answer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we got to find some corner of the world that's going to look at this incredibly powerful, potentially valuable thing and say, look, we need you to derive humanitarian value from this, not financial gain necessarily.
Mhm.
And we need to we need to basically take this very powerful thing and not do the wrong thing with it. And I just
Right,
don't
right.
know that the kind of legislation that would be able to grind the wheels to a stop, and
Mhm,
it's likely by just sheer volume,
mhm.
right, is going to allow a space that's going to develop that kind of creativity because this does take a tremendous amount of money to develop.
Mhm.
And where are you going to see this if there's not the profit? I guess I'm feeling very cynical this evening. I don't know how, if you stop this and say, well, we want to refocus it, you could ever start it again without those kind of interests.
Well, here I'll echo Morozov. I think Morozov's saying you asked literally the $1 million question. Where are you going to get the money that's going to be the seed bed to allow these creative designers to have at it and to actually compete with the corporations? His answer for that, it's not a popular one, but I think it's the only practical answer. The government would have to take over. Right now, Morozov points this out. Now, like I said, this is not an answer that's going to play in an election year, but I think it's Morozov's answer. And I think it is the only, I mean, I can't think of a better answer. And it goes something like this. I mean, he notes that one of the reasons why Google, et cetera, has taken over this stuff is because the government at every point in the last 10, 15 years, maybe longer, has said, you know what? You guys figure out this technology thing. We're not going to do it anymore. We used to be in that business. We call it the military. We're not going to do that stuff anymore. You're going to do it. And right now, the government has ceded for at least a decade the funding part of it, the funding element, the funding arm,
Yeah,
the funding
yeah,
component
yeah.
you're talking about to these corporations. And the corporations right now don't want to cede it. Who can do this? Corporations or the government? I don't see a third party. So the only way I see, and I think the only way he sees that you're going to get these content creators, this innovative approach you're talking about, they're going to need a hell of a lot of money. And if it's not coming from Google, it's going to have to come from a government.
Do you know why that switch happened?
I think that switch was called neoliberalism. It's when the government basically said, hey, you know what?
We can do this
Uh,
better and faster.
if you do it for profit and we take over the governing part of it and you guys do the production and development. So
Wow.
basically, yeah. I
There's
mean,
no
that is
coming.
neoliberalism, right?
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
neoliberalism.
There's no coming back from that, Barry.
Well, that would be the depressing answer or the,
Th-
the despairing answer to your question.
There's not, can you imagine the public outcry if in any year the government said, look, we got this
I
thing,
know, I
we're
know,
going to take
I
it
know.
back.
No,
Trust us.
no, I know, I know. Even when I was talking, Michael, I knew like how unpopular. Right now, we lost all our listeners, and I was just doing a hypothetical, dear listener, come back. But even to say it, I kind of went into the realm of the unsayable. Well, the only thing, but I do feel that Morozov gives many, many hints that how are you going to get these creative people? Well, they are going to need money, just like you said. And in the past, there has been money, but it came from the government. Government gave it to the Pentagon. That's how all this stuff started. Period. Period. And if you want to take it away from Google, I don't see a third way.
No, and
But
there's a,
but it's incredibly unpopular, right?
wow.
How are you going to sell that idea? I don't know. How about we end? I'm gonna do an ending gesture here, and I'm gonna further like blow stuff up. I'm gonna blow up stuff further.
Let's do that.
You know, when you were talking earlier, so we already detonated some explosive, so some explosive. Let me detonate some, throw in some more dynamite. As I was reading this, and I didn't even talk about this with Michael. I'm springing that on him in the pregame show. I'm springing on you now, but don't worry, I'm not springing it on you. I'm really detonating the show. We're moving to the end. But here's the other thought I had. And you were talking about it in the last couple of minutes. You were talking about the creative uses of AI. Okay, using ChatGPT to write an English paper, that's not necessarily that creative. But you know what, Michael? There is a version of AI generative knowledge that is totally effing creative.
Hmm.
Morozov doesn't mention, I mean, he mentions the smart chair. I got a better example
What you
than the
got?
smart chair for him. And it has nothing to do with boring stochastic parrot generative AI chat GPT.
Maybe a
It's music.
stochastic peacock here. What you got?
That's it. It's music. It's music. I'm a content creator. I'm a musician. Okay, I'm speaking hypothetically, but I'm going to use a real example. Let's say my favorite band is Oasis. Not that far from the truth, not the truth, but not that far from the truth. Well, in the last couple months, I don't know all the details, but I know enough details to end this episode with this anecdote. Um, British band, fond of Oasis. Oasis can't get Noel and Liam to talk to each other. They can't get back together. It's an ongoing soap opera, ongoing battle. So anyway, these guys like Oasis. And so, they said, we write kind of Oasis-like songs. The only thing we really need to do is just run I'm just going to ask AI to make my voice sound a lot more like Liam Gallagher. And so that was their creative idea. I mean, it is fulfilling an aesthetic desire. And guess what? It's really successful. It really works. But it's all about it's all about filling your artistic desires. I'm saying AI is already doing that. But the problem is it raises this question about originality and authenticity, but it also raises the question of copyright. And that's the other thing that he doesn't talk about. A lot of times, creativity means repetition and twisting of an original. And then that brings in other artistic realms, the problem of ownership and property. And that's a whole other kettle of fish that Morozov doesn't even talk about. But arguably, I would think that band that wants to sound like Oasis and technology, damn it, made it possible. I mean, isn't that the equivalent of your damn smart chair? I think it
Would
is.
you say that the same exists in art, visual art?
Yeah, yeah, right. Much to the consternation of artists. I realize that this kind of blows up, this obviously raises all these other questions, and we've discussed some of that on the show, right? The difference between, AI generated photography and art and painting, right? We've discussed some of these issues in the show. I'm just saying that, whatever is at stake in these debates, I'm not being glib about it, but I am saying, to me, it's not apparent that creativity is not being addressed and fulfilled in these examples of already existing generative AI.
But to your point about copyright and the legality of that, here we have the exact same thing that I was talking about earlier, right? Like the legal implications of this to slow it down. I mean, this isn't the copyright was not designed to slow down AI, but it
No,
is the
was it?
kind of thing
Right,
that is
right.
going to play here. You know, that's I mean, I think it's still very much the Wild West, and I think that there are artistic licenses that are available to say, well, I can do this because this is art and it's derivative, and I took something, and
Mm.
um, but I don't know. I'm just I get it. I understand the artistic value of this, but the problem is that's not that's how do I want to say this? We've moved so far away from prioritizing that. This is such a small voice given, or such a small concern given the powerful implications
I see.
attached to the
Yeah,
other uses of
yeah.
AI.
Well, I'll tell you, we ended this episode in a pickle, or we're in a quagmire. We're in a
Yeah, it's
quagmire.
I guess I don't want to just dance us in circles here, but the problem with this really does, as Morozov points out, right? It is tied to the market, and I think as long as these things are tied to profit, there's not an answer. But as you had sort of brought out, right, wrestling it away, or maybe it was my cynicism that brought it out, wrestling it away from the market and saying, look, we're taking your toy and we're going to share it with everybody,
We're going to
and
share it with
you're going to
everybody,
like it.
and you're going to like it.
Given the astounding popularity of socialism in this country, people's willingness to just jump on that wagon. I don't see the sarcasm, by the way, people. I don't see I don't see a happy solution for our fun toys here.
I think your last statement should be our final statement for this episode.
I
Can't say
think you're
better.
right. I think you're right. All right. Well, Barry, thank you. And yeah, good job. This was an interesting discussion.
Well, it was another fine mess that we got into,
This
and
was
I'm
a
very
mess, man.
all right. Next episode we'll have total clarity.
I was
I
just gonna
We
I was
don't
gonna make
even know what we're talking about yet, but we know it will be
it'll be
totally
clear.
clear
I was
next.
gonna make the same promise. So there you go. Barry, good evening to you, sir. We'll talk
Good
soon.
evening. Good evening. Take care, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.